Present day, March 1894. The wind blew bitterly cold as Erith stared at her stepmother's coffin being lowered. Kathleen Lock was buried with the 5 sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary at the graveside. A Mass of Christian burial will be held when the Roman Catholic priest came through later in the spring. There were a few mourners, and, as was customary, all the fishermen stayed ashore until it was over. The man was here too. She knew he caught her looking his way, but she couldn't help herself. Her stepmother's words kept playing over and over in her mind. She's alive, you know. Could it be possible? The accident was real. She had heard some of the townfolk talk about Father Fleming's death. Nobody dared mention her baby. Her stepmother told her that little Beatrice had been in the carriage when it plummeted into the river. How could she still be alive? But there was a risk in hope, especially when it burrowed deep into her core and echoed the longing in her heart. She didn't know if she had the courage to chase what would be a fleeting falsehood, but she didn't know if she had the strength or fortitude to stop herself from a possible elusive pursuit. Either way, she was probably damned. Either way, it was almost assuredly too late. There was only one thing she knew to do. She would ask the man Mary Rourke knew, Daniel Cooper, to help her. She had heard he was some sort of police officer in Boston before moving to the south side of North Harbour. Surely he would know how to find out if Beatrice was alive. Erith was grasping for anything that would make it real. She was prepared to face her own underlying fears in the bargain. This search was not about her, but about her baby girl. She waited patiently for Mrs. Patsy and Mrs. Helen to leave. Both women had accompanied her home after the funeral and had gotten her something to eat. Erith hadn't been hungry, but accepted their generosity. Mrs. Lucy's daughter had been helping in the store while her stepmother was sick. She would be back again tomorrow. For today, Erith was alone. When both women had disappeared over the little hill on the path down the harbour, she closed the door and headed along the shore in the opposite direction. She would cross on the ice between the points, as was usual for livyers on both sides of the harbour at this time of the year. The ice had partially formed on the harbour near the mouth of the river in late November and would break up in the next few weeks. However, a couple of the Ryans, Whalens, and Daniel Cooper had crossed the ice for her stepmother's service, so Erith was sure it was safe. She had never crossed before, but figured it was safest where it was the narrowest. Mr. Cooper was building a house near the point on the south side. She wished she had spoken to him earlier at the graveyard, but he hadn't given her his condolences. She would have asked to meet with him, but she didn't want anyone to know what she was up to. Hi, Edward. Erith was glad she had worn her woolen mittens and winter coat. She still sported the traditional black blouse and skirt of the morning because she hadn't brought many outfits with her from St. John's. She hadn't planned on being here that long. Although the day was relatively calm, the north wind had a bite to it, and the long skirts and woolen stockings helped keep her legs warm as she picked her way out the beach towards the point. Loose rocks and ice had iced over when the tide was high earlier in the day. The tide had gone down since, and some slab ice chunks lay stranded on the beach, waiting for the wash to free them once again. Erith wasn't paying much attention to anything around her. She was thinking back to the day her life had once again been shattered. Unconsciously, she put her hands over her ears to keep from hearing the words, "That baby is dead, coming from Kathleen's stern lips, then the door slamming shut in the room to signal that that was the end of it as her stepmother left. She hadn't gotten over that. Now, maybe it had all been a lie. Still, she didn't know how that could be. Her stepmother had given Beatrice to the priest, who was taking her to the orphanage. The priest and Beatrice had been killed on their way there. Kathleen Lock's cruelty knew no end, even in death. But if there was one chance, then Erith had to know. She almost tripped in the ladder on the beach before she saw it. A short distance away on the other side of the ice, she saw a similar ladder, which would take her up on the beach on the south side of the harbour. She noticed a few rocks scattered on the ice and figured someone must have been testing its thickness. Erith's mind flashed to the day she saw the 2 points from high on the ridge. They looked so close then, almost touching. Now, as she put her first foot on the wooden rung, the far shore seemed to move out of reach. Or maybe her mind was trying to tell her to leave things alone, that her search was in vain. Did she really want to bring back all that pain? Carefully, she clambered her way from the ladder onto the ice. If she counted 100 steps, she would surely be at the ladder on the far side. She hadn't done anything like this before, but then her life had taken so many strange turns over the last few years that she knew anything was possible. She pulled her cap over her ears and started to count as she looked down at her shoes. Concentrating as she counted out loud, she became vaguely aware of 2 things: the sound of water running and a man shouting at her. She looked up to see a man waving his arms and shouting. 22, 23, 24. As she laid her foot on the ice, she heard a cracking sound and saw the ice split apart. The fracture spiraled around her. Before she could react, she sensed a shift as the pan of ice shattered, and it dumped her unceremoniously into the frigid ocean. She felt the cold gray water grab hold of her and pull her down through a symphony of bubbles. She had escaped for the last time. Her stepmother had come to take her. Sinking, disoriented, her mouth open from the shock of the freezing water, her lungs contracted and sent air to meet the brackish insurgence somewhere in her throat. She couldn't right herself. Erith looked through the bubbles for an escape. There was a tug of war between her body and her clothing as she glimpsed a bright light in the distance. She was grateful to have learned how to swim, but she was not that strong. Her lungs battled for air, and she kicked her feet and pulled her cupped mitted hands towards the light. She surfaced in time to spit and then gulp a breath of fresh air. Instantly, she was dragged under once again, but this time she knew which way was up. She kicked. At least her brain instructed her legs to move. But her body suddenly became warm, and her strength and her limbs wouldn't answer what the force she demanded. Stepmother, you will not have me. She struggled one last time toward the jagged hole. As she came up a second time, she threw herself forward onto the hazy glass ice pan and clapped her mitts onto its surface. The wool stuck fast to the shiny, wet surface, and Erith clenched her thumb and fingers together to hang on for dear life. She gasped and spat out salt water as she tried to get her bearings. A man was crawling toward her, pushing a ladder along before him. He was shouting at her, but she couldn't hear because of the thunderous sound of her heart beating through the cold liquid rushing in her ears. Erith was in a precarious situation. She tried to kick, but her skirts were weighing her down, and the movement was causing the ice to crack further. She struggled to hold on, but her hands were becoming numb, her mind was dulling, and her will alone was not enough. She heard her father telling her to be strong, that she was a big girl now. Suddenly she was 4 again and nursing a bang on her knee. She tried to kick, but her legs wouldn't answer the plea. Then her father grabbed her arms and started to pull on her, helping her out of the water. He was saying something. He was reaching past her. She felt a hand at her waist. "Those skirts will drown you," her father said. She felt a hand tug on the waistband of her skirt. It wasn't her father. It was Naftal. Erith screamed, but her hands were trapped. She couldn't help herself. Naftal had the 2 hands covered, and his other hand was at her waist. Suddenly the heaviness of her skirt was gone. She felt a hand grab the petticoat in the back of her jacket, and then she knew she was being pitched onto the ice. Her mittens remained frozen to the surface near the hole. She tried to fight. She believed she knew what she was up against this time, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "Miss Locke, calm yourself or you'll kill us both." Erith swiped at the mass of wet hair in her eyes and pulled back her cap, which was somehow remained pinned to her head. It was Daniel Cooper lying on the ice next to her. Brought back to the present, she instinctively calmed when their eyes met. He was trying to save her. Before her mind could catch up, he rolled her face down onto the ladder and started to shimmy toward the land, pulling the ladder along with him. I have you, he repeated in a low and calming tone as he held her gaze. She stared at him, unable to move, silent as he snaked his way back to the shore. Here the ice was much darker. That's Siri. Here the ice was much darker, so she stood and grabbed both Erith and the ladder at the same time. Before Erith could say anything, he bolted toward the beach with her under one arm and the ladder under the other. He threw the ladder ahead of him where the ice met the beach and quickly made land. His sure-footedness was remarkable. He stood her before him and deftly undid the buttons of her soft, saggy coat, then threw his own around her. She couldn't feel her feet and realized her shoes were full of water and were slipping on the ice-covered rocks. I have to warn you, he said as he swept her off her feet into his arms and scaled the beach toward the big house on the hill. Her mind began to function again as the heat from his coat and his body penetrated through the Arctic chill that coursed through her veins. The house, a 2-story bright yellow house with 4 windows across the top floor and a massive place by all accounts. It had 3 chimneys, something unheard of in these parts. 6 windows stood along the front of the main floor facing the ocean, and a large gallery wound clear around. Erith went from awe to trepidation as he climbed the steps. She struggled to free herself from the tomb that encased her, panicking at the mere thought of being alone with a man and nobody else around. She wouldn't cry for fear he would see her weakness. Breathe, Erith, breathe. She had to think, but she couldn't get free. All she had were her words. Put me down, you big lout, she commanded. Her confidence was betrayed by a quiver. Now that's gratitude for you, Daniel said under his breath. I'm grateful, but I want to go home, she replied. I'll take you home once you get warmed up and dry. I have a fire going. He pulled open the door and stepped inside the porch. Erith was stricken. She struggled in his arms, and he almost lost her on the floor. What's wrong with you, woman? I'm bringing you in by the fire. Daniel held her like a rag doll, her weight of little consequence to him. He took long strides across the room toward a large stone fireplace and placed Erith in an armchair close to the hearth. A pool of water on the planks near the door led to where she sat now. She bundled his coat closer around her, slipped out of her shoes, and gathered her legs beneath the thin layers of her petticoat. Her long, wiry locks were tangled around her face, and her cap was dripping icy water. Daniel reached forward, grabbed the cap, and threw it on the stone ledge near the fire. Erith had instinctively cowered. She heard a sudden plop, then hisses as water droplets landed on the flames. But she would not be distracted by such trivial things and stared at the man before her. His vibrant blue eyes reflected the light from the fireplace as he towered over her. "We need to warm you," he stated matter-of-factly. He reached for his coat, but she withdrew into the chair. "Don't you touch me," she shouted hysterically. He pulled back. "Why are you shouting?" "Don't you touch me," she said. This time her words were a little calmer, but still carried a hint of venom. He held up his hands and backed away. "Look, you're soaking wet beneath my coat. You're cold, your face is blue, and your teeth are chattering. You have to get warm." "I don't need your help." "That's yet to be seen." "I'm fine." "You think you're fine." Erith stopped speaking. To her dismay, he was right. She couldn't feel the heat from the fire through the coat. She was sitting in water, and she was freezing. Her soaking clothes were probably painted on her, but she would be damned if he was taking off the coat in front of him. By God, she was alone here with a man, and half her clothes were gone. Fear settled on her heart, and she glanced around for an escape. How could she get out of this if things were to go bad for her? "Miss Lock, I'm going to go fetch a dry shirt and some quilts for you. I can tell you don't want to be here, but there's nowhere for you to go in your condition." Erith nodded her understanding. "I'll bank the wood in the fire so you can dry yourself off, and then I'll leave you to do whatever you need to do to get warm." Daniel quickly went upstairs and returned with 2 quilts and 2 flannel shirts. He handed them to her, his raised eyebrows telling her that he expected her to take them. "Get out of those clothes as soon as you can, and wrap yourself in the quilts near the fire. The sooner the better. I have to change out of these wet things, and will be down when you say so. Shout if you need something." He turned and headed for the stairs one more time. It was only then she realized that he was wet through. He had risked his life for her. Erith knew he was trying to make her feel at ease. Her teeth clicked together as shivers coursed through her. She could feel the heat from the fire on her face, but it still wasn't penetrating through the soaking layers. Water was trickling from her unruly hair and making icy trails down her neck and under the coat. This was probably the one time she wished she hadn't rebelled against her stepmother's influence of wearing her hair in a tight bun. She could hear Daniel moving around upstairs and reluctant to change her clothes, but her body began to shudder. "You'll stay up there till I'm ready, right?" she asked tentatively. "On my honor," came the reply from above. Without giving herself time to think, she threw off the coat, gathered one of the quilts around her back, and bent over to remove her skirt. The quilt would keep her out of view if he changed his mind. The beige and brown upholstery of the chair showed the damp outline of her body. Her clothes were still drenched, and her blouse was stuck to her skin and was difficult to remove. Her fingers shook uncontrollably as she undid the buttons. The quilt felt heavy, but she couldn't remove it. Steam began to rise from the patchwork. "I can come down and get you a towel for your hair and a cup of warm tea, but only when you ask," she heard him say. There was a pause, and then he said, "Just so you know, I'm cold too." "I'm going as fast as I can," she retorted. She was frustrated with the blouse. Finally it came unbuttoned. She looked at the stairs once, threw the quilt from her back, and quickly got out of the blouse and petticoat and into the shirt, then layered the second one on over it. Though they were wet, she kept her stockings on because he had not given her anything to cover her legs. Erith quickly balled her clothes together and laid them near the fire. She trod on the wet quilt, picked up the other one, and threw it around her. Choosing not to sit in the chair again, she moved to the hearth and sat on the warm stone. "You can come down now."